Standing in that crowded auditorium at Stanford University, I never imagined my ex-husband's public humiliation would lead to the most satisfying moment of my life. The afternoon California sun streamed through the windows as Richard screamed, "Nobody respects you," loud enough for nearby families to turn and stare in shock. Before I reveal what my quiet response did to his face and why it left him speechless, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever been publicly disrespected by someone who had no idea what you were really capable of. My name is Dr. Margaret Chen, and for 20 years, I believed my marriage to Richard Thompson was a partnership where we both contributed to our family's success. Our sprawling home in Palo Alto with its perfectly landscaped gardens and luxury cars told one story, but the financial reality was something entirely different. Richard worked as a software sales manager at a mid-tier tech company, earning a decent but unremarkable salary that barely covered our mortgage and basic expenses. What Richard never bothered to understand was that my work as a pediatric surgeon at UCSF Medical Center wasn't just a career, it was the foundation that built our entire lifestyle. My annual income of $650,000 dwarfed his $85,000 salary, but somehow in his mind, his role as head of household made him the primary breadwinner. He would introduce himself at social gatherings as Richard Thompson from TechFlow Solutions, while introducing me as my wife Margaret. She works at the hospital. The pattern of diminishing my contributions started early in our marriage, but became more pronounced as my career advanced. When I completed my surgical residency and fellowship, Richard's reaction wasn't pride but resentment. "I hope this doctor thing doesn't go to your head," he said, on the night I received my board certification. "You still need to remember what's important. Family comes first." His definition of family priority meant his comfort and ego took precedence over acknowledging my achievements. Our son Michael grew up witnessing this dynamic, watching his father treat his mother's life-saving medical career as a secondary concern to his mediocre sales job. During Michael's high school years, when he expressed interest in medicine, Richard would steer conversations toward more practical career paths. "Your mom's job is very stressful," he would tell Michael. "You want something stable that gives you time for family, like what I do in sales." Part 2. The financial reality of our marriage was something I had carefully shielded from Richard's ego for decades. Not only did my surgical income pay for our house, cars, and lifestyle, but I had been quietly building substantial investments and savings that Richard knew nothing about. My financial advisor, Patricia Wong, had helped me establish separate accounts and investment portfolios that secured our family's future while protecting my assets from Richard's spending impulses. Richard's relationship with money was troubling in ways that became more apparent over time. Despite earning a fraction of what I made, he felt entitled to make major financial decisions for our family. He would purchase expensive electronics, plan costly vacations, and commit to large expenses without consulting me, always assuming my income would cover whatever he decided we could afford. "Don't worry about the money stuff," he would say dismissively. "That's my job to handle." The irony was devastating. Richard handled none of the actual finances. I paid our mortgage, utilities, insurance, and taxes. I funded Michael's private school tuition, summer camps, and college savings account. I covered our family's health insurance through my hospital benefits. Richard's salary barely covered his car payment, golf club membership, and personal spending money. Yet he maintained the illusion that he was our family's financial provider. Our marriage counseling sessions, which I initiated after years of feeling undervalued, revealed the depth of Richard's delusions about our partnership. When our therapist asked him to describe his contributions to the family, Richard spoke extensively about his leadership and financial responsibility, while dismissing my surgical career as Margaret's little job at the hospital. The therapist's barely concealed shock at his attitude was a wake-up call I had been avoiding for years. The breaking point came when Michael was accepted to Stanford University with partial academic scholarships. Richard immediately began planning how we would afford the remaining tuition costs, discussing payment plans and parent loans as if he would be contributing anything significant to our son's education. When I mentioned that I had already saved enough money to cover Michael's entire college expenses, Richard's reaction was fury rather than gratitude. Part 3. You should have discussed these college savings with me before making unilateral decisions, Richard exploded when I revealed the education fund I had been building for 15 years. I'm the head of this household, and major financial decisions go through me. His anger at discovering I had secured our son's future without his involvement revealed everything wrong with our marriage dynamic. He wasn't upset about the financial security. He was furious that I had acted independently. The divorce proceedings that followed were eye-opening in ways I hadn't anticipated. Richard's lawyer initially demanded 50% of all marital assets, assuming we had shared financial contributions throughout our marriage. When my attorney presented documentation showing that I had paid for virtually everything while Richard contributed minimal income to our household, the opposing legal team scrambled to adjust their strategy. Richard's depositions were particularly revealing when he was forced to account for his actual financial contributions to our 20-year marriage. Under oath, he admitted that his salary had never covered more than his personal expenses and maybe 20% of our household costs. The transcripts showed a man who had been living a fantasy where his modest income somehow entitled him to half of the wealth I had generated through years of demanding surgical work. The custody evaluation process was equally illuminating. Michael, now 18 and preparing for college, was interviewed about his relationship with both parents. What he told the family court evaluator destroyed Richard's narrative about being the dedicated family provider. Dad always talked about money and success, but Mom was the one who actually paid for everything. She worked nights and weekends at the hospital so I could have opportunities he couldn't afford to give me. California's community property laws meant Richard was entitled to some marital assets, but the prenuptial agreement I had insisted upon before our wedding protected the majority of my medical practice income and investments. Richard's lawyer attempted to challenge the prenup, claiming he hadn't understood its implications when he signed it. But 20 years of living off my income made his financial ignorance argument difficult to sustain. Part 4. The final divorce settlement left Richard with enough money to maintain a modest lifestyle, while I retained the house, my practice, and the substantial investments that reflected my actual contributions to our family's wealth. More importantly, I had sole responsibility for Michael's college expenses, ensuring my son's education wouldn't become a power struggle between divorced parents. Richard's reaction to the settlement was predictable: fury that his lifestyle would change dramatically without access to my income. Michael's graduation day at Stanford arrived 18 months after our divorce was finalized. I had looked forward to this moment for years, watching my brilliant son excel academically while pursuing pre-med studies. The ceremony was held in Stanford's Memorial Auditorium, with thousands of proud families celebrating their graduates' achievements. I had invited my parents, my sister, and several close friends to share this milestone moment. Richard arrived with his new girlfriend, a woman 20 years younger, who seemed impressed by his Stanford connections and apparent success. What she didn't know was that Richard's presence at Stanford was entirely funded by my surgical income, from the cap and gown rental to the celebration dinner reservations he had made at an expensive Palo Alto restaurant. His new relationship was built on the same financial illusions that had sustained our marriage. As we found our seats in the crowded auditorium, Richard immediately began performing his successful father role for his girlfriend's benefit. He pointed out Michael on the stage with pride, discussing our son's academic achievements as if he had been the driving force behind Michael's success. I always knew he had what it takes, Richard told his girlfriend loudly enough for nearby families to hear. Good genes and proper guidance make all the difference. The graduation ceremony proceeded with the usual speeches about future potential and achievement. When Michael's name was called for his degree in biological sciences, I felt overwhelming pride in the young man who had worked so hard despite watching his parents' marriage deteriorate. As Michael crossed the stage to receive his diploma, Richard stood and cheered, as if he had been the primary support system throughout our son's educational journey. Part 5. After the ceremony, families gathered outside Memorial Auditorium for photos and celebrations. I was taking pictures with Michael, my parents, and my sister when Richard approached with his girlfriend, clearly wanting to insert himself into our family photos. "Michael, let's get some shots with your father," he announced, positioning himself prominently in the group as if he had been present and supportive throughout Michael's college years. The tension was manageable until Richard began regaling nearby families with stories about our success and how proud he was of his son's achievements. His girlfriend hung on every word, obviously impressed by his apparent role in raising a Stanford graduate. What pushed me over the edge was hearing Richard tell another father, "The key is being involved and making sacrifices. I've always prioritized my son's education over everything else." The lies were staggering in their audacity. Richard had missed most of Michael's school events due to his golf schedule or work trips. He had never helped with homework, attended parent-teacher conferences, or shown interest in Michael's academic progress. More importantly, he had contributed virtually nothing to the financial support that made Michael's Stanford education possible. Yet here he stood, claiming credit for achievements that came from my sacrifices and support. When Michael was pulled aside by classmates for photos, I found myself standing near Richard and his girlfriend, listening to him continue his fabricated narrative about being a dedicated father and provider. "Education is expensive," he was telling her. "But when you're committed to your child's future, you find a way to make it work. I've always believed in investing in Michael's potential, regardless of the cost." The final straw came when a family friend approached to congratulate me on Michael's graduation, and Richard immediately interjected. "It's been a team effort," he announced loudly, "but I think my guidance and financial support really made the difference. Margaret helped too, of course, but the important decisions and sacrifices came from me." His girlfriend nodded approvingly, clearly impressed by his apparent generosity and involvement. Part 6. That's when I lost all patience with Richard's performance. 20 years of diminishing my contributions, 18 months of bitter divorce proceedings, and now watching him steal credit for our son's achievements in front of his new girlfriend and our family friends was more than I could tolerate. "Richard," I said calmly, "I think you're getting confused about who did what during Michael's education." Richard's response was swift and vicious, designed to humiliate me in front of everyone present. "Margaret, nobody respects you," he shouted loud enough for families 30 feet away to turn and stare. "You think because you have some medical degree that makes you important, but everyone knows I'm the one who built our family's success. You're just bitter because you can't handle the truth about your role in our marriage." The public nature of his attack was designed to embarrass me into silence, a tactic he had used throughout our marriage whenever I challenged his version of events. His girlfriend looked shocked by his sudden aggression, while nearby families watched our drama unfold with obvious discomfort. Michael, returning from his classmate photos, froze as he witnessed his father's public assault on his mother at his own graduation ceremony. But Richard had miscalculated badly. After 2 decades of surgical training and practice, I wasn't the intimidated young woman he had married. Standing in that crowd of Stanford families with my son's diploma representing years of my financial sacrifice and support, I felt a clarity that cut through all of Richard's manipulation and lies. This was my moment to set the record straight once and for all. I stepped closer to Richard, close enough that my voice could be heard clearly, but without shouting like he had. "Richard," I said calmly, my surgeon's composure intact despite my racing heart, "check who paid for this." The simple statement hung in the air between us as his confident expression began to shift toward uncertainty. His girlfriend looked confused, clearly not understanding the implications of what I had just said. Part 7. The color drained from Richard's face as the full meaning of my words hit him. In front of his new girlfriend, our family friends, and dozens of Stanford families, he was being confronted with the financial reality he had spent years trying to hide. "Margaret, this isn't the time or place for this conversation," he said, his voice noticeably quieter than his previous shouting. But I wasn't finished with him yet. "Actually, Richard, this is exactly the time and place," I continued, maintaining my calm professional demeanor. "You just told everyone that you built our family's success and made the important financial sacrifices. So please, Enlighten everyone about exactly how much money you contributed to Michael's Stanford education. The question hung in the air as Richard's girlfriend looked between us with growing confusion and concern. My sister Sarah, who had witnessed 20 years of Richard's financial dependence, stepped closer to show her support. "Yes, Richard," she added with obvious satisfaction. "Please tell us all about these financial sacrifices you made for Michael's education. We're all very interested to hear about your contributions." Her tone made it clear that she knew exactly what Richard's actual contributions had been. Essentially nothing. Richard's girlfriend, sensing the shift in dynamics, asked the question everyone was thinking. "Richard, what is she talking about? You said you paid for Michael's college." The direct question from his new relationship forced Richard into a corner he couldn't escape with his usual deflection tactics. His silence spoke volumes as nearby families continued watching our confrontation with fascination. Michael, understanding exactly what was happening, made a decision that would devastate his father's pretenses completely. "Actually," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Mom paid for everything. My tuition, room and board, books, living expenses. All of it came from her surgical practice income. Dad didn't contribute anything to my Stanford education, except criticism and complaints about the cost." Part 8. The revelation hit Richard's girlfriend like a physical blow. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock, to something approaching horror, as she realized the man she was dating had been lying about fundamental aspects of his character and financial status. "You told me you were successful and financially responsible," she said, her voice rising with indignation. "You said you had sacrificed everything to give your son the best education possible." Richard's attempts at damage control were pathetic in their transparency. "That's not exactly how it worked," he stammered, looking desperately between his girlfriend and the growing audience of families who were now openly staring at our drama. "Margaret makes it sound simple, but there were lots of factors involved in Michael's education funding." His vague explanations convinced no one, especially his girlfriend, who was clearly reevaluating everything he had told her. My family friend Patricia, who had known us throughout our marriage, decided to pile on with information that made Richard's deception even more obvious. "Richard, didn't Margaret also pay for your house, your cars, and most of your living expenses during your marriage? I remember you always talking about money being tight when she was the one earning 6 figures as a surgeon." Her questions destroyed any remaining credibility Richard might have had. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger as word spread about the confrontation happening outside Memorial Auditorium. Stanford families love drama, especially when it involves exposing financial fraud and marriage deception. Richard found himself the center of attention for all the wrong reasons, his carefully constructed image as a successful provider crumbling in real time before dozens of witnesses. His girlfriend, processing the full scope of Richard's lies, made her own announcement for everyone to hear. "Richard, if you lied about something this fundamental, what else have you been lying about? This is exactly the kind of financial deception my divorce attorney warned me to watch for." Her public rejection of Richard in front of the Stanford community was the perfect capstone to his humiliation. Part 9. Michael, emboldened by watching his mother finally get the recognition she deserved, decided to share more details about our family's financial reality. "Mom worked nights and weekends at the hospital to pay for everything we had," he announced to the gathered crowd. "She missed family dinners and vacations because she was saving lives and earning money to support our family. Dad played golf and complained about her work schedule while living off her income. The systematic destruction of Richard's reputation was everything I had hoped for and more. Parents who had been impressed by his Stanford father routine now looked at him with obvious disgust. His girlfriend had stepped away from him physically, clearly planning her exit strategy from their relationship. Even his attempts to salvage the situation by downplaying Michael's statements only made him look more pathetic and dishonest. "Margaret, you're making this more dramatic than it needs to be," Richard attempted weakly, but his voice lacked any conviction. "We both contributed to Michael's success in different ways. But the financial facts were undeniable, and everyone present understood that his contributions had been negligible compared to my decades of surgical income that funded our son's education and our family's lifestyle. The Stanford alumni networking opportunities Richard had probably hoped to leverage through Michael's graduation were now completely destroyed. Word travels fast in academic communities, and within hours the story of the divorced father who falsely claimed credit for achievements he never supported would be circulating throughout the Bay Area professional networks Richard had hoped to access. My parents, who had remained silent during most of the confrontation, finally spoke up with devastating effectiveness. "Richard," my father said in his quiet but authoritative voice, "Margaret has been supporting your lifestyle and your son's education for 20 years. Perhaps it's time you showed some gratitude instead of making false claims about contributions you never made." Coming from a man Richard had always tried to impress, the rebuke was particularly crushing. Part 10. As the confrontation reached its conclusion, Richard's isolation was complete. His girlfriend had walked away without a word, clearly planning to end their relationship immediately. The Stanford families who had witnessed his public humiliation would remember him as the divorced father who tried to steal credit for achievements he never supported. Most devastatingly, Michael had publicly acknowledged that his success came from my sacrifices, not Richard's involvement. The photographic evidence of Richard's humiliation was preserved forever, as other families recorded the drama on their phones. Within days, videos of his "nobody respects you" outburst, followed by his complete inability to justify his claims about financial contributions, would be circulating on social media. His professional reputation in Silicon Valley was effectively destroyed by his own behavior. Michael's graduation celebration dinner that evening was a joy I had never experienced during our marriage. Without Richard's presence to diminish my achievements, I was finally recognized by our extended family and friends as the dedicated mother and successful surgeon who had made our son's Stanford education possible. The respect and gratitude I received that night was worth 20 years of being undervalued and dismissed. 6 months later, I received word that Richard had been forced to move back in with his parents after his girlfriend left him, and his attempts to maintain his expensive lifestyle without access to my income failed completely. His reputation in professional and social circles had been so damaged by the Stanford incident that finding new employment or relationships became increasingly difficult for him. The final vindication came when Michael started his first year at UCSF Medical School, following in my footsteps toward a career in medicine. The acceptance letter specifically mentioned his academic achievements and the strong foundation provided by his family's commitment to education. As I wrote the first tuition check, I felt profound satisfaction knowing that my son understood exactly who had made his opportunities possible. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't planned at all. It's simply letting the truth speak for itself when someone tries to steal credit for your life's work. Have you ever had someone try to take credit for achievements they never supported? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this journey of setting the record straight resonated with you.